Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is a free video. If you have paid to watch this video, then you have been scammed and you should ask for a refund. You can watch this video and more for free on my Yoku channel at i.yoku.com/elite English training. Thanks for watching. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this fourth video in a series looking at the TOEFL reading section. In this video we're going to be looking at the vocabulary questions and the reference questions. They're almost the same type of questions, so we're going to tackle them both in the same video. As you will know from the previous videos, we have 10 question types. We've looked at the find factual information, understand negative facts, making inferences, and infer rhetorical purpose questions. Like I said, we're going to be looking at reference usage and vocabulary in this particular video. Before we begin, please make sure that you have skimmed through the entire reading passage before continuing with this tutorial. The link is in the description that I've placed underneath the video window. So you can scroll down, click on the link and get the PDF that I've linked to and skim through the entire reading passage before we continue. When we're looking at vocabulary questions, you need to be able to understand how words are used in context. Not just the dictionary definition. Dictionaries are very useful tools, but unfortunately they don't teach you the one thing that you need most of all on the TOEFL test, which is how to use those words in reference to other words in a sentence. You should also be able to understand the difference between academic and technical vocabulary. We've covered this before in some of the listening videos that I've put up. The difference between academic and technical vocabulary is very important, obviously because the TOEFL is being used for people that are going to be going to study abroad in English-speaking countries. The focus on the TOEFL is going to be on academic vocabulary. The vocabulary questions on the TOEFL will usually involve the use of academic words, not technical words. Now, with the vocabulary questions, the technical vocabulary that you'll be presented with in the reading section will actually probably be defined for you on the test. You'll probably see at the bottom, you'll probably see a few footnotes where they will explain, or they will give you either the translation or the definition of any technical vocabulary that you might not be familiar with. This is because the test is testing your ability to learn about the material. That's what's being evaluated here. So any technical things that you obviously will not come across during your kind of everyday life as you go around reading stuff and prepping for this, anything that they think that you don't know or shouldn't know will actually be explained for you on the paper. It would be a good idea to try to improve your technical and academic vocabulary just so that you're familiar with the way that these words are constructed. These words are constructed in a slightly different way because they're usually either Latin or Greek words, and they have specific rules that govern how they're put together. So have a look at technical words, have a look at academic vocabulary. There are resources on the internet where you can find lists of academic vocabulary. How can you identify a vocabulary question? It's pretty easy. They're actually the easiest questions to identify because they directly ask here, what does this word mean? Usually you'll see something like the word blank is closest in meaning to, or something like that. You'll see variations on this. It's closest in meaning to, or it's similar in meaning to. They're the easiest type of questions to identify on the TOEFL quiz, on the TOEFL test, so don't be too worried about that. To begin with, we're going to be looking at the reading passage and we're going to be analysing questions 1, 3, 4 and 8. So the first question, as we can see straight away, it's very, very straightforward. The word massive in paragraph 1 is closest in meaning to A, ancient, B, carefully planned, C, very large, or D, carefully protected. So let's have a look at the reading. So we can see as we look down, the word massive is actually highlighted. The sentence is a pretty long sentence actually. We can see a number of massive religious edifices and a regular grid pattern of streets and buildings. That's the end of the sentence there. So let's take a look at some general strategies that we can use in solving these types of questions. It's important to realize that vocabulary in English, well, in almost any language, it functions in a local way. This means that they're connected to other words in the sentence, but not usually with words outside of the sentence. So the problem with the first question that we've got here is that it's a particularly long sentence. So we need to actually look and analyze and pick out what is being, how the words relate to each other in the certain sentence. In that particular sentence, it's going to be pretty difficult because it is so long. The immediate context will help to determine how the word is being used. So we need to look at the word that's highlighted, look at the word that we're being asked to define, or find a similar, or find a synonym for, and actually spread out going forwards and backwards in the sentence to look at how we can best answer this question. So let's have a look at the sentence here. It had over 2,000 apartment complexes and a great market, a large number of industrial workshops, an administrative centre, a number of massive religious edifices, and a regular grid pattern of streets and buildings. So we can see there's a big long list here. There's the word large and the word massive is used a couple of times. We're talking about a couple of different things. We're talking about apartment complexes, industrial workshops, administrative centres, and religious edifices, as well as talking in general about the streets and buildings that are around the area. So when we're talking in terms of general strategy, it's usually useful to remove the word from the sentence and see which words seem to fit into the sentence after we've removed it. So we'll have a look at this first question, just an example. So we've got these words: ancient, carefully planned, very large, and carefully protected. And we've removed the words, so now we've got a number of blank religious edifices. If we try and put the words from the answer stem into the blank space now, we can see that almost any of these words could fit. We could have ancient religious edifices. We could have carefully planned religious edifices. We could have very large religious edifices. We could have carefully protected religious edifices. What we can see from this question here, by creating a blank before the object that we want to describe, is that almost any of the immediate collocations look like any answer could be used. We could easily choose A, B, C, or D here. So let's have a look in a little bit more depth at collocations. Collocations basically describes the immediate connection between two words. Now, they cause problems for English language learners because they aren't strictly defined in grammatical terms, but there are three broad groups. So there's unfortunately there's just either big long lists of words that collocations that you can learn of things that generally go together. For example, you can have things like make and bed. The verb goes with the object here. You never say do the bed. You always say make the bed. You never say do the tea. You always say make the tea. You never say make the dishes. You always say do the dishes. There are three broad groups of these collocations. There are adjectives and nouns. A beautiful day, sunny day, things like that. Subject and a verb. And as I gave you some examples with make and do, we can have a verb and an object. There are some collocations that are more common than others. For example, you can have things like everyday items. You can have bacon and eggs. You can have black and white. You can have milk and sugar. These things are commonly put together. Or you can have things that are contextually defined, like a big deal. If you go shopping a lot, if you do a lot of, look at some of the adverts in the newspaper, you might see something that says satisfaction guaranteed. and of course we can have laptop computer. These are some examples of the more common collocations. There are many thousand more. There are no grammatical rules for which one that goes together. It's more like a kind of a language habit that people have. Collocations change on a regular basis. New collocations come up. Tweet a picture, for example. This has come up. Poke a friend, if you're from Facebook and Twitter. These are two things that you'll see more commonly. If we have a look at this sentence again, a number of blank edifices. We'll go back to this sentence. So this is the sentence that we're looking at. Blank religious edifices. What we need to do to give us a little bit more help is to think more contextually. Remember that this is not really an exam where we're looking at people's ability to translate, or we're looking at people's ability to memorize the correct definitions of things, or memorize big long lists of collocations. We actually have to look at the sentence in the context of the paragraph and then see if we can choose the right answer from the answer stem. So if we go back and we have a look at the three proposed answers that we need to choose from, we've got ancient, carefully planned, very large, and carefully protected. So in the context now, let's have a look at this first one, ancient. Would a religious edifice have been regarded as ancient in the time that we were talking about? So you have to imagine now that we're talking about 2,000 years ago now. Would a religious edifice 2,000 years ago be regarded as ancient? It's ancient to us now, but what about the time context we're reading about? If we think of it in that kind of a way, then we can pretty much remove A, because we don't really think that people living in that time, living in the past, would actually regard something that they use for religious purposes every day to be ancient. It becomes ancient after a period of time, so we can get rid of A. Now, we've got three answers left. We've got carefully planned, we've got very large, and carefully protected. The next question that we need to ask ourselves is, can we move away from the immediate collocation and try to find anything else that would reinforce the meaning of the missing word? So we have two carefully's here, and we have very large. So what repeated or restated ideas can we see in this passage? Well, it's pretty obvious. We can see that there were over 2,000 apartment complex. We can also see that there was a large number of industrial workshops. So these are two clues here. 2,000 is a large number, it's a big number. And then we also have something else that means big, a large number of. So we can pretty much lose option D, which is carefully protected. There's nothing in this paragraph to indicate that anything is very carefully protected at all. There's no mention of an army, there's no mention of any walls, there's no mention of any kind of police force or anything like that that would indicate to us that anything is protected. We can see this there's a large number of things, there's a lot of them, and some of them are big, but there's a great market. Some of these things are big, some of these things are designed to accommodate a lot of people. So we can get rid of answer D, which is carefully protected, which leaves us with two that are more obvious in the context of the paragraph. We have a carefully planned, if something's got a large number, we've got 2,000 apartment complexes and a great market and a large number of industrial workshops. It's fairly reasonable that all of this needs to be planned. And given the numbers of the number of people, the number of things that we've got in this paragraph, we can imagine that they are actually carefully planned. But if we look back to restated ideas and a way of reinforcing this idea that something is big, something is large, there's a lot of people involved, then we can actually get rid of option B, which is carefully planned. Again, there's no evidence in the actual paragraph here that anything was carefully planned. It does mention a regular grid pattern of streets and buildings, but it doesn't mention how they were designed. So there's been less of an emphasis on the design of the grid patterns of streets and buildings, and more of an emphasis on the idea of bigness in this paragraph. So we can actually, through this process of elimination and carefully analyzing the text, carefully analyzing the sentence, the segment that we're trying to solve here in the question, we can actually leave option C, which is very large. And if you look at the list of things going before it, the apartment complexes, the market, the industrial workshops, we can see that there's a running theme through this. We can see this running theme of this idea that the writer wants to get across to you the kind of the scope and the size. 2,000 apartment complexes, large number. And it's a running theme that goes through this big list. It all relates to each other, and we can say with pretty much with certain confidence that very large does actually linguistically fit in to this list, and it is the right answer. Which leads us nicely on to the first of our TOEFL tactics: multiple meanings and other confusions. The TOEFL will try to trick you by using multiple meanings of the same word. This is one of the really annoying things about English. It's probably one of the most annoying things about most languages, is that one word can have 2 or 3 different meanings. For example, the word great. We saw this in the passage before. A great market. This could mean a wonderful market, a really great market, something that's really nice to go to, or it could mean big. So what the TOEFL will actually try and trick you with is that it will focus on the second or third meaning of a word rather than the first or the most common meaning of a word. This doesn't mean that you need to go off and raid your dictionaries for all the different meanings of all the different words, because I think there's a word called, if you look up in your dictionary the word set, S-E-T, this is actually the word in the English language that has the most different definitions. So you can use it as a verb, set the table. You can use it as a count word. So you can say a set of dinner plates, or you can use it in tennis games, set and match. It has 2 different noun meanings. It has many different uses. You don't need to go away and learn these and cram these from your dictionary, but you do need to go and see how that word, or how any word in fact, changes in the context of a sentence. The TOEFL will try and do this. It will focus on the second or third meaning of a word rather than the first or the most common. It's a very important point, because it means that if you've chosen the right word, the first meaning or the most common, it's probably the wrong one. So let's have a look at question 3. The word pinpoint in paragraph 2 is closest in meaning to identify precisely, make an argument for, describe, understand. Now if we move on to have a look at word roots and affixes, this is what we need to be able to solve this particular question. The TOEFL will use distractors that play on the meanings of different parts of the word. The word that we've been asked about may have a root or an affix which will be similar to one or more answer choices but would not work in context. So this is kind of a test of your ability to see the word in context. It's not a test, like I've said before, it's not a test of your ability to translate. This is probably what you've been used to on other tests, but it's actually testing your ability to see words in context and see how they're used. So we need to have a look at this idea of word roots and affixes before we go on to solve this particular question. An affix is something that goes that changes the word. So an affix that goes before the word is called a prefix. An affix that goes at the end of the word is called a suffix. And not every word uses an affix, but many academic words do. This is not only a useful trick for when you're taking the TOEFL, but it's also a useful thing to know about when you're actually trying to figure out what new words mean, which is basically what we need to do in the TOEFL. is that we need to maybe try and figure out where these words come from in a certain context, words that we've never seen before in a certain context. So, prefixes. These are found at the start of the word. Now, it's important to remember that not every word has a prefix. And these can change. There's no set rules for these. There's no set formula for these things, because English, as you probably figured out, is a language that's been patched together from many, many different languages. The common ones are un, im, dis, con, and miss. So we can have a word understand, we can add the word miss to the front of it, we can add add a prefix, miss, and then we can get the word misunderstand. We can take the word possible, we can add the prefix im, and we can get the word impossible. Now this is not to mean that every word that you see like this can form the opposite just by adding a prefix to it. You can't say something is unred. You can't say something is unwhite. You have to say something, the opposite of white is black. You can't say something is uncoffee. These have very particular rules. They're very, very contextual, and you need to be able to recognize. You need to be able to break down the words and see the word for the component parts. You need to look at a word like dangerous and then add the prefix. You can't just add the prefix undangerous. You can add the suffix ly, dangerously, or you can either reduce it down even further and get the word danger and then add another suffix, which is ous, which then creates the word dangerous. These are very, very specific. You need to have a look at them, but they don't apply to every word. So, moving on, as we mentioned, suffixes. Suffixes are found at the end of the word. Not every word has a suffix, but many do, especially when we're talking in terms of academic speech, an academic language. Suffixes tell us what part of speech a word is and how it fits into the overall situation. So some examples, for people, you will find suffixes like ist, ist, we will get the word scientist, er, we get the word teacher. You can also have the word engineer, add er to engine, and then you get the person who does the job with the engine. ian, electrician. Nouns for things, tion. This is actually borrowed from the French. Tion, you can have to have words like situation, information. These all come from the French cion, but in English it's the tion. These are used for describing things. ment, management, another French word, another French suffix. It's come into English, ment, and ity, an example here, reality. So these are two suffixes that we add on to common words to create nouns for people and things. Verbs, you'll often find en, for example, weaken. ize in American English, ise in British English will transform the word energy to energize, and ify, beautify, to make something more beautiful. Beautify. Adjectives, you'll often find the suffix ous with generous. able, another French, import into English, knowledgeable. And ful, beautiful. These are some of the more common ones that you'll find. There are lots of other suffixes out there for you to have a look at. Don't try and cram them all. Do some active reading. Make sure that you've got comprehensible input. Make reading a part of your study routine. You'll learn these suffixes just through repeated exposure. It's impossible to just get a big long list of them and try and cram them before the exam. So if we have a look, this is a very quick example of how word roots, especially in academic language, can be used to create other words. Suffix and prefixes can be added to a root to change it to another type of word. So we're not actually changing the meaning so much, we're just changing we're changing the part of speech that it is. But there'll be a common theme, so we'll be able to guess even if we don't know the actual word. So we'll have a look at this example here. Bio means life, and ology means the study of. So if we put bio and ology together, we get the word biology. This is a noun. It's a noun for a thing. It's a noun for a subject that people study at university or that people study in school. If we take the word biology and add another suffix to it, ist, we get the word biologist. So now we've changed this. Now it's still kind of in the same vein as biology, but now we've got this word biologist. It is slightly different, but it means that we're still focusing on someone who studies the science of life. But now we've changed it to the person. We've changed it to a noun here now. We can actually break this down even further. We can get a little bit more detailed, and we can take the word biologist and we can add the prefix micro, which now becomes microbiologist. So we've actually become a lot more specific about what kind of biologist we're talking about. We're talking to microbiologist. Now we're going to be looking at the rest of these questions in a little bit more detail for the rest of the video. Let's have a look at question 4. We're going to leave question 3 for a minute. Now, the word ingenuity in paragraph 2 is closest in meaning to A, ambition, B, sincerity, C, faith, or D, cleverness. Now here you can actually see two affixes. You can see the word in and you can see the word ity. Remember that we said the way of changing a word to a noun form for a thing would be to add ity. But this now has one of our negative prefixes, the in or im, this, at the front with this in at the front of the word here. So we need to have a look at what's left, and we've got this gnu, which is in the middle. Once we've removed these affixes, we have this gnui, or we can see this gnu. We can see that this might be a part of a word that we already know. If we go back to question 3, the word pinpoint in paragraph 2 is closest in meaning to identify precisely, make an argument for, describe or understand. Now you might already know what this word pinpoint means. You might know the first definition. But we know now that the TOEFL will try to trick us by asking us for the second or third definition. We need to have a different approach to this question to question 4. Question 4 was looking at word roots and using affixes to change a certain word. We need to be able to identify the word root in that. This particular question is going to be looking at different definitions of a word. Pinpoint does not have any affixes or suffixes. It's actually two words put together, pin and point. We need to be able to differentiate between which is the most common definition and which is the second or third definition, and also which definition fits in context in paragraph 2. Looking at question 8, the word predominant in paragraph 3 is closest in meaning to A, most aggressive, B, most productive, C, principal, or D, earliest. Now, looking at this word again, we can see a couple of prefixes and suffixes here. We've got the word pre, and then we've got the suffix nant. So in the middle, we've got domin. We need to take the words apart and we need to put them back together, and then we need to kind of see how they fit in context in paragraph 3. So we can probably already guess what the word means, even if you've never seen the word before. You've probably seen the word root before. Now you have to think logically and see what fits in context and how the prefixes and suffixes will change the meaning of the word. So let's have a look at question 4, ingenuity. The sentence that we've got here is, the exact role of other factors is much more difficult to pinpoint. For instance, Teotihuacan's religious significance as a shrine, the historical situation in and around the Valley of Mexico toward the end of the first millennium BC, the ingenuity and foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite, and finally the impact of natural disasters such as the volcanic eruptions of the late 1st millennium BC. Let's highlight this this first question that we were asked about, this question 4 that we were asked about, the blank and foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite. So we're going to zoom in and focus in on this particular segment of the sentence, and with the 4 answers here on the left. We've got ambition, sincerity, faith and cleverness. Now, this is actually a collocation, so we have blank and foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite. So the blank and foresightedness, we have two tasks here. We have to find a word that goes with foresightedness, that collocates with foresightedness, and works with foresightedness to describe Teotihuacan's elite. Now, it does help if you know what foresightedness means. It's a word with a couple of different parts to it. We've got fore, we've got sighted, and we've got ness. This is pretty much what makes the TOEFL pretty difficult to an exam to take a guess on, because if you don't know one half of the context, then it's very, very difficult to actually take a guess on what word goes with the collocation here. So you need to know what foresightedness means to begin with. We can actually, using the first part of the process of solving this question, we can actually get rid of the word faith, because faith and foresightedness just doesn't collocate together. And the faith of Teotihuacan's elite and the foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite are pretty much two separate things. We can't really have things like faith and foresightedness going together to both describe Teotihuacan's elite and collocating. Which leaves us with A, B and D, ambition, sincerity and cleverness. Again, sincerity doesn't collocate with foresightedness. It doesn't really work together to describe Teotihuacan's elite in the context of this sentence either. So we can pretty much get rid of B. So we're left with 2 possible answers that both are as likely as the other to be correct. We've got ambition and we've got cleverness. The ambition and foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite, and the cleverness and foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite. Cleverness has this ness here, foresightedness. We think that they could go together. We can have people being clever and people being foresighted, and we can also have people being ambitious and people being foresighted. Now, if we go back to the actual question, which, if you remember, is we were looking for another word that means, or another word that is closest in meaning to ingenuity. Genius, of course, is going to be part of that word, the GNU, the middle part. If we take away the in and we take away the ITY, then we're left with this GNU. It's derived, the word root is actually genius. Genius, of course, being a clever person. We can actually put in the answer cleverness and foresightedness, which fits together both in context and the collocation works together to describe Teotihuacan's elite. Let's move on to question 3, the word pinpoint. The exact role of other factors is much more difficult to pinpoint. For instance, Teotihuacan's religious significance as a shrine, the historical situation in and around the Valley of Mexico towards the end of the 1st millennium BC. So let's blank out that word and have a look at some of the other words around it to see if we can get some clues to what the correct answer choice would be. We have the word exact role and much more difficult. So let's zoom in, let's focus in on this particular sentence, these 2 ideas. Let's focus on this particular segment of the sentence and see if we can use some of this to help us choose the right answer. Now we've got the word exact here. And we've got in the first one, we have the word precisely. Now, exact and precisely goes together, so we'll keep that. Make an argument for. We can't really see anything in the context of the sentence, of this particular sentence segment, that is looking at making an argument. We've got this idea of other factors, we've got a role of one thing in a list of others. There's no real kind of mention of any kind of argument here. We're looking at something that plays a role. We're not looking at something that contradicts to create an argument. So I don't think that B will be the right answer in this particular situation. Describe. The exact role of other factors is much more difficult to describe. Again, if we go back to the paragraph, then it actually goes into quite a lot of detail describing the other factors. So it describes in quite a lot of detail. So I think that we can get rid of option C here as well. And option D, understand. The exact role of other factors is much more difficult to understand. I think from the level of detail that we've got in this particular paragraph, the factors do come together, but understanding them and how one role fits in with another, this could actually be a more logical choice here. So we could have the exact role of other factors is much more difficult to understand. The exact role of other factors is much more difficult to identify precisely. Now, as I mentioned before, we have this word exact and we have this word precisely in option A. So precise means exact, and the addition of an ly suffix turns this from an adjective into an adverb. So then we have the verb to identify, and now we have the adverb precisely. So the exact role and precisely goes together to help us choose the correct answer A, which is identify precisely. Moving on to question 8. The archaeological evidence clearly indicates, though, that Teotihuacan was at the center, did arise as the predominant force in the area by the 1st century AD. So we have to look at this word, predominant, which is the word that most closely matches up with the word predominant here. We've got most aggressive, most productive, principal, and earliest. Now, we need to have a look at some of the key words here. We'll blank out the word predominant and have a look at some of the key words here. We've got the word center, we've got arise, and we've got the word force. Now, these are the words that are going to help us identify the correct answer. If we have a look at D first, earliest, Teotihuacan was a center that did arise as the earliest force. This really doesn't kind of go together here. The earliest force in an early force, we don't really use the word early to describe force in a certain area, especially since Teotihuacan is being described as the center of something. And we've got this other word, arise, which gives us an indication that something happened over a period of time. So we're looking from this word arise, we're looking at something that builds up and develops. Earliest doesn't really go here, so we can get rid of this one here as well. We can also get rid of most productive as well, I think. The most productive force, we can't really use productive to describe a force here. We're looking for something which is a little bit more, has a little bit more energy to it, really. And we've got the word aggressive, most aggressive, and we've got the word principal. Now, the word aggressive would normally be reserved for describing an army, or something like a Mongol force, a very offensive force. There's nothing really in this text that describes something like an army or something that tells us there's a lot of fighting. Center, rise, force in the area. Not particularly something that goes together. Again, it's a little bit of a trick because aggression and force do go together. But if we have a look at the thing in context, if we read through it and say the center that did arise is the most aggressive force in the area, we would expect a lot more fighting talk, basically, in the paragraph. So I think that we can get rid of most aggressive, and we can get this final answer: C, principal force. The center and the principal go together. Centers and principle. The principal idea of something is a central idea for something. So if we look at these two words that go together, principal force collocates. Center and principal goes together quite nicely, and arise is a nice verb that goes in to describe the principle arising. We have a principle that arises out of a certain group. So for this particular answer, C, principle, is the correct answer. So a couple of thoughts just to wrap up with this particular segment, this particular question type. It's too late on the test. I think it's fairly obvious from what we've shown you that you can't just guess the meanings of words here. You can't rely on the first or the most common definition in the dictionary, and some things will go together. If you don't know what foresightedness means, you're going to have problems actually choosing the right answer that goes in the blank before it. It might be possible to guess some of them, but there's no substitute for knowing the meaning for absolute sure. If you don't know what if you're not totally confident about what the word means, it's going to be a problem. Process of elimination isn't a good technique if you don't definitely know the wrong answers. Remember, with process of elimination, we can't discard answers as being wrong just because we don't understand the word. You need to have a look at improving your word knowledge. The only way to improve your TOEFL performance is to improve both your academic and technical vocabulary. The academic word list on the internet is a good place to start, and it would be a good idea to improve your general English. Expanding your reading is a very good strategy. Research has shown that people who read for pleasure will actually increase their TOEFL score by an average of 3.5 points each week. So go out, get a book, go and read for pleasure, get as much exposure to English as you can. Now, with these reference questions, there are no reference questions actually included in the quick prep download link. So we'll discuss the idea and we'll give a sample question and see how we can go through and solve it. Reference questions are very similar to vocabulary questions, so we don't really need to go too far to see any examples. Now, when we talk about reference in English, we're generally looking at a general group. You've probably seen these a couple of times before. If you've studied English to any kind of advanced level, you'll know a couple of these reference questions. For example, we have these things called relative pronouns. You can see in the demonstrative column here, we've got this, these, that, and those. So when you're talking about using a relative pronoun, for example, I need a computer that's very fast, we have this word that. So you need a computer, and then you need something that's very fast. This is what we're talking about in reference questions. We're talking mostly about pronouns here for things and people. Subject, you can use I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Objects will have me, you, him, it, us, them. Possessives, mine, yours, his, hers, theirs, ours, yours. Reflexive, myself, yourself, himself, herself. Itself, themselves, ourselves. Demonstrative, I just went through this, these, that, those. And indefinite reference, other and another. We need to have a look at this idea of antecedents as well. Antecedents are words that refer to a previously stated idea. It's going to be either a previously discussed or a prior point. Okay, so what people will do in English, what you'll find a lot, is that in order to be not to be boring or not to be too boring, people will actually discuss previous points or prior points that they've previously gone over. But they'll use different words. For example, you could have something like the difference between teacher and instructor is very, very small. So we can actually use this to add a little bit of colour to our language. And you can also group together ideas. You'll see, for example, you'll see a sentence like the 3 ideas previously discussed. So let's have a look at this text. I'm going to give you a sample question, but let's have a look at this text first. This last factor is at least circumstantially implicated in Teotihuacan's rise. Prior to 200 BC, a number of relatively small centers coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico. Around this time, the largest of these centers, Quilquilco, was seriously affected by a volcanic eruption, with much of its agricultural land covered by lava. With Quilquilco eliminated as a potential rival, any one of a number of relatively modest towns might have emerged as a leading economic and political power in central Mexico. The archaeological evidence clearly indicates, though, that Teotihuacan was a center that did arise as the predominant force in the area by the 1st century AD. So let's have a look at some of the key points here. We have this last factor. We need to know what that is going to be referring to. A number of relatively small centers. This time, around this time, these centers, its agricultural land, a number of relatively modest towns, the archaeological evidence, the center, and the predominant force in the area. What we get from this by highlighting these particular points is that we don't see any kind of explanation about what these things might mean. We have this last factor, but then it never tells us what the last factor is. It's assumed that we will have read through the previous paragraph. This is referring to all these things that are highlighted on the screen right now are previous ideas that have been discussed. It doesn't need to go into depth into explaining what these ideas are. The area, the predominant force, the archaeological evidence has all been discussed before. This time, the small centers that coexisted in and near the Valley of Mexico, these things have all come up in the paragraphs previous to this one. So if we have a look at the sample question, this is a typical question. It's not actually on the quick prep download, but this is gives you a general idea of how we would try and solve this particular question. The phrase "the last factor" is referring to A, the influence of the religious communities, B, the elite of Teotihuacan, C, the rise of the other cities in the area, or D, the effect of natural disasters. So let's have a closer look at the text and give you the list of answers on the left-hand side of the screen. In order to solve this particular question, we're looking here at the previous paragraph. The exact role of other factors starts off, this is the way that the paragraph starts off, and it gives us a big long list of things. We need to go through this list and decide which is the last factor and what it refers to, moving on into the second paragraph that we saw before. So we have, let's have a look at this first one, the influence of religious communities. Now we have, at the start of this, a big long list of things. Teotihuacan's religious significance as a shrine. This happens quite early on in the preceding paragraph to the one that we just looked at. So I don't think that we can really involve this, option A, as being, there's no real influence really. There's religious significance, but there's no real influence being mentioned. Remember, we're looking at things that we can prove here. B, the elite of Teotihuacan. Now, the elite are actually mentioned here. the ingenuity and foresightedness of Teotihuacan's elite. This really does. It's not really the last factor, because we see this word finally, the impact of natural disasters. So this word finally would indicate to us that there's everything before that is not the last factor. So I think we can get rid of the elite of Teotihuacan. It is connected to the word finally, but not in the way that we want. The rise of other cities in the area. Oh, there's nothing really mentioned here about the rise of other cities. There's nothing really that we can use in the paragraph to prove that option C would be the right answer. The only city that's actually mentioned is Teotihuacan. No other cities are actually mentioned, so we can get rid of option C. If we look down at the bottom, obviously we've got this word finally, and then the impact of natural disasters such as the volcanic eruptions. Now, this is an important point, is that we've got this idea natural disasters, but then we've got a reinforcing idea of volcanic eruptions. Volcanic eruptions obviously being natural disasters, we can actually take this as being the right answer because it's being reinforced twice. We've got this idea of natural disasters, and then if we still don't get it, if we still don't understand that this is the answer that we're looking for, then we have an example of what the natural disasters could be. We don't really have this in any other situation, any other thing in the list. We've got a shrine, historical, it's religiously significant, it's historically significant, there's ingenuity and foresightedness of the people that live there, but no other list actually has this kind of double reinforcing, this kind of double signpost that we're looking for this idea of natural disasters. And it's also the last item in the list, so we can pretty confidently choose option D. So, final thoughts. Vocabulary questions ask you to find the meaning of a word in context. Reference questions ask you to identify the correct antecedent or whatever word it is referring to. So we're looking for previously discussed ideas, we're looking for previously introduced words. Both questions will be looking at vocabulary that functions in a local way. You need to look at the context, you need to look at the time frame, you need to look at what's being discussed. Don't just rely on your dictionary. Don't take things out of context and follow the dictionary. The TOEIC is more complicated than that. Start with the immediate words and work outwards, and use this technique of blanking out the word to see which answer choice fits after using the process of elimination is useful as well. Reference questions require you to focus on the antecedents of the word or words in question. So, is the antecedent singular or plural? Let's look for this idea. Is the antecedent before or after the reference word? And don't assume that words closest to the reference words are the antecedents. Common tricks on this part of the TOEFL include words that contain a possible meaning but don't fit the context, and distractors that use similar roots and affixes. So, thanks very much for watching. I hope you found this particular video useful. We'll be back for part 5. Please leave any questions and comments in the comment section on the bottom underneath this video. So, thank you very much, and we'll see you again in part 5. Bye bye.